Hello, good afternoon, everybody. If I could just call the room to order, please. Sorry about that. It's.
You know you're live. Well, I was just fixing up where to go delivering leaflets for our new council.
Right, if we can move on to the business of today's meeting, please. It's Wednesday the 26th. Here. It's not good, is it? Is it that that's causing it? Okay, sorry. Right, sorry about that. It was my laptop that was too close to the microphone. Sorry, my apologies. I'll start again. Good afternoon, everybody. It's Wednesday, the 26th of January 2022, 2 p.m. This is the Governance and Audit meeting that was carried forward from Wednesday, 22nd of December, which we had to cancel due to the COVID restrictions at the time. So, first item on the agenda, before we start, I would just like to formally welcome Councillor Cathy Rice-Oxley onto this committee. So first meeting this afternoon, so big welcome. There is no fire drill expected today. So if the fire alarm does ring, it is a fire. And if we could all exit the building through the fire exits that's at the back of the chamber, please. Could I just remind everybody in attendance, please, to turn their mobiles and all the electronic devices either off or to silent, if possible, please. Thank you very much indeed. So the first item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence and any replacement members. Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Ashley Baxter. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. It's still playing up, isn't it? Thanks. Thank you. Okay, so the second item on the agenda is disclosure of interest. So are there any disclosure of interest in the room, please? Can't see any. Okay, so we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of October 2021, which are on pages 3 to 10 of the meeting papers. I have actually got one slight amendment that I'd like to put forward. At the top of page 5, the first paragraph, the first sentence there reads, the auditor clarified that the report findings were made prior to the Economic Development and Corporate Services Overview and Screening Committee. That should read Finance, Economic Development and Corporate Services Screening Committee. So I'm just proposing that amendment to them, which is just the addition of a word. So going through the minutes, has anybody else got anything to raise from the minutes in terms of accuracy or any issues arising? Thank you. Okay, I can't see any. So in that case, can I have a proposer for the minutes, please? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Jackie Smith. Thank you much indeed. So all those members voting in favour of the minutes, please indicate. Anybody against? And any abstentions? There's one abstention. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so over to the item 4, which is updates from previous meetings. I'm going to, which are listed on page 11. And I'm going to, because I had the pre-meeting, I think that Richard is going to sort of go through that. So over to Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think item 42, I can see Craig Spence is here from Housing Services, so hopefully he can provide an update in respect of the propeller system. In respect of item 46, Emma Whitaker's here from Planning. She can give an update on the 106. And for item 42, the IT access in respect of staff leavers, Alan Robinson and myself can provide an update on that when we get to that one. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Richard. So if we go over to Craig first, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to provide assurance that the system installation has now been completed for fire, gas and our electrical certification records. The priority remains the management of fire actions. We have now included a specific module to track fire assets, which include our fire extinguishers, fire doors, to enable specific monitoring and servicing. The module to record passenger lift compliance is nearly complete, and the asbestos module to monitor compliance is being progressed, which is going to be completed in the next couple of weeks. And our fire asset tag module is also complete. And what I'd like to propose is that I share some of our reports from that system to be circulated with the minutes of this meeting, if that's acceptable.
Thanks, Craig. Yes, I think that's fine. If any other members got anything else to add, if that's acceptable, which I think it is. Yes, thanks, Craig. Thanks indeed. So now over to Alan and Richard on the IT. Thank you.
So just in terms of this action, members might recall that the issue was in terms of the internal audit findings. There were, under the sampling that was undertaken, there were a small number of staff members who had left the authority's employment, but they still had activated access to some of the systems that they would have previously had access to. So there's been a system change that has eliminated that risk. So as soon as an employee of the authority has left the employment, that's put onto the HR system, and that automatically sends a notification to IT, and they will sever the links that employee had in terms of the system access.
That's great. Thanks, Richard. Okay, that's great. So over to Emma on the section 106. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. We've published the latest infrastructure funding statement as of the 31st of December. That sets out the position in terms of negotiated 106s in the last financial year. It sets out a current update in terms of funds held, funds spent, funds allocated as well. I appreciate there's probably a little bit more work to be done in terms of providing different information and making that available to not only our councillors but also our town and parish councils as well. So I can announce that we've started a project to look at the overall end-to-end process in terms of section 106, just to pick up off the back of the audit that was done last year, just to make sure that we've got robust systems in place and that we've got better engagement with our stakeholders. And I'm happy to report that back as progress is made to the audit committee, if you'd like. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Emma. I think at the last meeting we did discuss the sort of issues around process would come here, performance would go. And I think there was some debate about would it be the planning committee or the rural and communities. So obviously a report on the process here, but if you just advise Emma where you think it's best suited for the performance to go. Thanks.
I think there's probably two elements to that in terms of the Rural and Communities Committee is always a good committee, but I think the Planning Committee actually is interested in some of the information as well, because of course it's relevant to the planning decisions that they're making on a monthly basis, as well as any other decisions that we make. So I think that's part of the better engagement that we need to have with councillors. So it is likely that there'll be a split in terms of process versus reporting of figures. So we've got scrutiny, but I would add the planning committee into that mix as well.
Thanks, Emma. So I guess then, okay, you want to? Okay, Paul to the question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's really a question for you, Emma. Obviously, it's important, the Section 106 agreements. Are we quite clear on what we hold and what we've got? And I know some of them are for parish councils. Do we keep parish councils informed, or do they have to claim them? It's just the whole process. Are we keeping up to date with it? Because I'm just conscious in the past, I think money's been put into 106 and kept, and then people don't know about it, not being able to claim for it. So I just want, are you clear that we go in the right direction to clarify things on Section 106 agreements? Thank you.
So certainly from what I've seen so far, we haven't had any significant, or certainly no cases recently where we've had to hand money back to developers, and that's the real concern. But I do think that there is some work to be done with our town and parish councils and also colleagues within the council as well, around keeping them better informed about projects. that they may, or monies that are coming in. But actually that starts when we negotiate the Section 106 at the beginning. So it's a full end-to-end process that I do need to look at. So it will be robust. It will improve things, and I think probably more importantly, make it clear for everybody what their role is and what the process is as well. And that will require better engagement with the town and parish councils. And I'll be happy to have further discussions in due course with them.
Okay, thanks, Emma. So in terms of process, obviously probably bring a report back to this committee in the future. Do you think, because this is really with you, I'm thinking maybe 6 months' time. Is that a feasible timetable for you? Thanks.
I'll make a note of that. I don't see why I shouldn't be able to bring something back within 6 months, even if it's sort of a work in progress, just to report what we've got so far. No problem.
Okay, that's fine. Sheriff, you can have that on the. Sorry, Councillor Sue Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Wood raises a really valid point, and I'm going to give you an anecdotal example of where I think that local members do need to be kept informed. In the Bourne area, we had an allocation of 106 monies that was actually for an NHS spend, and one of our colleagues got in touch with me to say, look, the time period is coming to an end. They still haven't spent it. Is there anything that you can do to chase it up? And so it was chased up. I do believe the money eventually was handed over, but I think we got to within about a month before. And had the local area, if we'd have known earlier how close it was getting, there's no doubt that we could have had a mechanism to chase through. Otherwise, it was over £40,000, so it's not to be sniffed at, is it? And so I really would welcome a process that includes members, not just going to committees, but somehow an update where it is applicable, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Wood. I think that's a really, really good point. I'm just wondering, Emma, if you could work with LELC around this to sort of get the message out to town and parish councils, because they're the body, aren't they, for town and parish councils, to maybe put something out through them. Just wondering if at some point we could do some kind of training or engagement type of session or something to make them aware of the process. It might be useful.
No problem at all. I think there's also some better training that we can do, both for members but also our colleagues, around the whole purpose of Section 106 as well, so they can be better at coming forward with projects in advance, so that we can perhaps be better at collecting more money for them to spend on the things that they want to in the parishes. So I think there's two elements to it there that I'm keen to look at.
Thanks, Emma. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. There was a lot of good points made there. I think the secret is that if the parish councils know the money is available, then we can come up with ideas, and conversely, we should come up with ideas so that then they can put it in. Just exactly what Emma's just said. But I think we've fallen down on that because we as a council don't know half what's available to us. It's only recently, this last 6 months, that we've ever had any contact with regard to 106 money. So I think it's a good point to move forward with, that they liaise with the council so that they can spend the money appropriately.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. You make a very good point now, because obviously I think that maybe something we can consider as well is better training for councillors, and then those councillors that then have dealings with their local town or parish councils kind of act as a kind of a link back to them, but also some potentially some direct training and engagement with town and parish councils, I think would be really useful as well, so they can come at it from both sides. Councillor Woolley again.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to come back. I think it would, if we possibly could have a mechanism within the council that members can just flick on a switch and look on the website and just see. It needn't be open to the public, although I don't see any reason why the public shouldn't have sight of it, but so that we can look and check up on what's outstanding, or indeed what's available, perhaps in an adjoining ward, where joining the monies up would then make perfect sense to do a particular type of project. So, having that site that's easily available and easy to access would be very helpful.
Yes, thanks. Thank you very much, Constable. Emma, just if you could just just respond on those points, please. Thanks.
I think they're all very good points. I'll bear them in mind when we're looking at as ease of access for information. I've got a few ideas, and we'll see what we can do. But I'm all for collecting money and other infrastructure provision through Section 106, because that's its purpose, and I'm definitely supportive of spending it. So we want to make sure it's put to the right purpose.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Emma. Has anybody got anything else on the action sheets notes before we move on? Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item 5, which is the internal audit progress report. And I understand out the auditors from RSM are online. So if we can pass over to RSM to present their update. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I couldn't be there today. Can I just check you guys can hear me? So I'll initially take you through the progress report and then the specific reports thereafter. So initially just focusing on the key messages. So since the last audit and governance and audit committee met, we finalised 3 reports, which are the council-owned companies, medium-term financial planning, and the follow-up 3. The first 2 of these I'll present in a moment, and then the follow-up is a separate agenda item afterwards.
Chairman, the audio in here is really difficult. It just seems like a constant boom from Aaron's voice rather than words. Is there anything we can do about that, the quality of the audio?
Aaron, can you try again, please?
Yeah, of course. Sorry, I couldn't hear anything then. It just went silent, so I'll take over again. So I'll start again from the beginning. So our key messages. So since the last governance and audit committee meeting, we've finalised 3 reports, which are council-owned companies, the medium-term financial planning, and the follow-up 3. The first of these 2 I'll take in a moment, and then the follow-up will be a separate agenda item afterwards, which we can go through. One change to the plan to note since the last meeting. So the full audit for the street scene stock was unable to be completed due to stock no longer being held by the council, which is now managed by a third party. So as a result, we included the actions that were raised in the previous year's audit as part of follow-up 4 in December, which the results will go to the committee in March. The last thing to mention on the progress report before I get into the 2 specific reports, we're on progress to deliver the whole plan in time for year end, with a final audit due to be conducted on the 7th of February. Then in the next committee, the continuous assurance 3 and 4 and the final follow-up will be presented, and that will be all audits delivered within the year. So just before I go on to the 2 reports within the progress report, I'll just take any questions on those areas I've just mentioned.
Move on now. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so I'll take you through the 2 reports in turn. So the first report was the council-owned companies. Review that we conducted. This resulted in 2 medium and 3 low management actions being agreed. This review is to assess the controls in place from the council's perspective and how they ensure governance over the owned companies from a strategic level. This was conducted as an advisory review to look into the controls and processes and look for key improvements that could be suggested, with the stance of ensuring that we audited the council and not the companies themselves. So I'll take through the actions. So the two mediums related to ensuring a consistent approach to what documents are presented for each company's committee for scrutiny, so that it's consistent across each of the companies. At the time, there was a slight discrepancy between what was being presented per company. So it's just bringing those in line with one another and standardising the process where possible. And the second medium was to ensure that there was a follow-up conducted from the company's committee workshop training was delivered. And this is just to ensure members are sure of their roles and as good practice assessing the effectiveness of a committee. And then the low actions related to ensuring that agreements between the councils and the companies just detail specific reporting requirements. And there was a specific action relating to ESK to ensure their service specification was up to date since it was brought back in-house from a previous grounds maintenance provider. The remaining two lows related to ensuring consistent templates were used for business plans. Again, this just allows the council to adequately assess these in turn and ensure they're updated in line with requirements. Again, at the time of the audit, there was a discrepancy between the templates being used and therefore didn't allow for consistent scrutiny across all companies. And then finally, it was just to ensure that the company's committee terms of reference gets updated as a result of this audit and findings that, in general from these meetings, just to reflect the roles and tighten up on certain areas, just to ensure that the council focus on the strategic detail and not focusing on operational matters within the companies themselves, which are outside of the council's remit. So that's the companies committee. So I'll pause at the council and companies review. So I'll pause there just for any questions on this.
Thanks very much. Has anybody got any questions? Councillor Sewelly.
Thank you, Chairman. I sat and listened to the companies committee yesterday and cross-referencing that with this meeting today, I have a number of concerns around the way that it's mentioned here around the consistency of how the companies individually seem to be working individually rather than we don't seem to have a process that's consistent or some companies offer more information than others. But the bottom line is, from a governance point of view, there is no consistent process, or I couldn't see or hear anything yesterday that gave me any confidence that that was the case. Particularly what was coming out of the companies committee yesterday was, for me, getting to the point where we've had this internal review, and I do just wonder whether we ought to look at an external audit review, more of a governance review rather than an audit review. So I will park that for a moment. But in this particular item, for example, page 31, and I think it's mentioned elsewhere, the training that was held on the 28th of July, we are not just a year, we are nearly 18 months further on in. What further training has taken place? Those directors at that time, I'm not certain that all of those directors are still in post. In other words, I believe there are directors that may need to take that training. So I'd really like to know when the dates are, when it's going to happen, and when we're going to see some consistency. But I believe we've mentioned this before, so it's now getting to the point where perhaps we ought to have a governance review. Thank you.
So thanks, Councillor Wooley. Before we go on any further, just need to the Vice Chairman's got a statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to declare an interest. Some time ago, a few months ago, I was appointed a Director of Environment SK. So I'm a director of that company, so I'll declare that interest now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. But I thought I'd better do that first. Aaron, have you got a view on the thoughts of Councillor Woolley on this, please? Thank you.
So in terms of dates, etc. for training, that's probably one for management to answer. But in terms of consistency, this was sort of a theme that we were raising throughout, and we've agreed dates with management as part of this review, which are included on the report. And obviously we'll follow those up again in future. But again, it's probably a question for management in terms of timescales on implementing.
Thanks very much. I mean, I am a member of the Commons. I am a member of the Commons Committee, and it is true that we did have the one session of training. There's been none since then. But pass over to Richard Wiles now. Thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of observations. I think the point about consistency of documentation and consistency about templates was kind of the heart of the recommendation from internal audit, because when you look at the business plan for ESK, it's a little bit different to the business plan of ISK, which again is a little bit different to the one of Leisure SK. So that was kind of the point that was being drawn out in this, that the information that's going to company's committee is not following an agreed format. It's a little bit kind of down to the company's style. And I think from a council perspective, we'd want to see consistency of information. And the follow on from that is also about performance information. And rather than the company providing information that the company feels appropriate, it's more the other way around. The committee, as the shareholders of those companies, should be prescribing exactly what they want to see and when they want to see it and the frequency in which they want to see it. I think yesterday's agenda is probably a little bit slightly more unusual because it was a whole range of different things. There was something in there about directors being appointed on there. There was something in there about some funding requests. There was something in there about update on the gravitas development. So they were a little bit kind of unique in terms of the information that was being presented. But the point to think of the audit is saying that the business cycle of the companies should be set out by the committee, and they should be saying to the companies, this is what we want, this is how we want it, and this is the frequency in which we want to receive that information. I think the one about the workshops is interesting because it was also about the committee. The training was for the committee itself, as well as the roles of a director and the personal responsibility a director takes when being nominated to go onto a committee. But there's also that bit about the committee themselves and what their terms of reference are, and that temptation of not getting into the weeds of how to run those companies. That's not the committee's role. That's the role of the directors. It was about making sure the committee members feel free to lift themselves up and out and look down on the companies and be able to probe and challenge where necessary. But obviously Alan's here, works with HR. I'm sure if he's not already logged it, it'll be in the members' training programs currently being reviewed and updated. So hopefully that's been picked up anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Have you got anything else to add, Alan, on that? Thank you.
I mean, not specifically, but yeah, we are obviously constantly reviewing the member development programme. And I'm speaking on behalf of your vice chairman and other colleagues in the room as now directors of some of these companies. I think we do need to understand our roles and responsibilities in that. That'll be something that will come forward as well, that training for those people who are directly involved, as well as the training for this committee to enable it to fulfil its, not this committee, company's committee, to fulfil its role as shareholder and holding those companies to account in a consistent approach. So all those things need to be looked at. 18 months as quite rightly been said, a long time. Those things need to be in the diaries, and we need to start to move that forward. So I'll take it away from here as a clear action. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thanks so much, Alan. Just when we move on, I just wonder if anybody wants to address Councillor Woolley's point around a possibility of an external governance review. Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. Not it's for me to decide what the governance and audit wish to do, but I think Councillor Woolley's made a very valid point, and I think it'd be a very useful exercise for this committee to look at.
Thank you so much, Councillor Cook, because one thing I was going to obviously suggest, because obviously with the Sean's Lincolnshire becoming the new internal auditors from 1st of April, I was going to sort of suggest that they work out a very, very detailed action plan and follow up from this. But obviously we're looking at that from the perspective of an internal review as opposed to an external review. So that may be something. I'm just wondering if perhaps initially, if we let Sean's Lincolnshire come back with a work plan, then maybe decide if members of the committee would like an external review later. Is that acceptable? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that sounds eminently acceptable. Yes, I think that would be the way forward for a start, definitely.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Woolley. Councillor Rice-Oxley.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question about the performance templates, which Richard just mentioned, which are on page 29, which sound incredibly sensible. So there's a date on here of the 31st of March. So just, I don't know who to ask this to, but are they in train and are they being prepared? Will they be prepared in time for directors or whoever needs to fill them in to have enough time? Because it might be new information that they're not used to providing, if I understand it correctly. Will they have enough time to provide these to the companies committee for the next meeting, which is the end of April? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Rice-Oxley. This was an issue we did raise during the pre-meet. Richard, have you anything to add to that? Thank you.
I can have a go. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously down for the head of Democratic Services. I'm sure Alan's working with Graham Watts to ensure they're in place. I mean, in some instances, there are already performance dashboards in place, but it's making sure that, as we've said, that it's actually from the perspective of the committee, not what the committee not what the company itself chooses to present, but it's what's necessary and pertinent for the committee to be cited on. So I don't think it'll be an absolute, to be fair, end of March it's done, but I think from end of March working with the committee, and then that's kind of a valid point actually. These are recommendations that ultimately need to go to the company's committee, because the governance and audit have requested this review being done, but clearly the ownership of it sits with the company's committee as well, because it's that committee that needs to take responsibility to take these actions forward and embed them and make sure they're satisfied and they work to the satisfaction of this committee. So it's kind of making sure that works effectively. But yes, from April, clearly one company's coming off the register, if you like, Invest SK. The direction of travel for that is it won't be in place from April going forward anyway. So we will be looking at a slightly smaller family of companies from that point. But yes, they will be in place as we go through next year.
Thanks, Richard. Have you got anything to add, Alan, on that?
Not particularly, Chairman. I mean, I think what Richard said is where we're at, but we recognise that we need to be managing the companies through as the shareholder through the companies committee to work for them, and ensuring that the remaining companies that are council owned are run appropriately and provide the information, the management information that the shareholder needs to be satisfied that they're performing and providing the outcomes that they were set up to do. So we'll make sure that happens. We'll give that some urgency, and yeah, I think Richard's right about the role of companies committee as well, to ensure that it is them who are the shareholder, remember, and provide that functionality. So
yes. So thanks, Alan. Something else we did discuss in the pre-meet was sending this report to the companies committee for both their information and their feedback. So I think that'd be really, really useful, because obviously they are ultimately the company that will own a lot of this. Councillor Rice-Oxley's got a second question. Thank you.
Thank you. Just thank you for allowing me to come back. So are we saying that the good timeline might be that these are prepared and brought for approval to the April meeting for the companies committee to sign off on the template and then to go to companies to use? Or is this something that it sounds so key and so important? I'm just trying to get the timeline right in my head. Is this something that's going to be produced between now and companies committee, and people are going to be expected to use them for companies committee? Or is this work that's going to be done and then these templates are going to come to committee for sort of, yes, that's what we want in a template, and then they go back to the companies?
Thank you, Councillor Oxley. Just who wants to pick this up just to clarify the timeline?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not actually sure when the next companies committee will be, but at the next available companies committee, the expectation from this action will be that each of those companies will present to the companies committee some suggested performance templates that align with the business plan and the requirements of, as Alan says, the outcomes that the council set those companies up to deliver. And then the companies committee will satisfy or feed back as to whether they need some changes made to those. But once agreed, they will be the templates in which performance will be updated to the committee thereafter.
Thank you very much, Need, for that clarity. Yeah, again, I think that's really, as somebody has been on the Commons Committee, I think trying to get some consistency going forward, you know, for the committee in terms of performance templates, I think would be extremely useful, because I know there's been it's been a sort of a bit of a learning curve on both sides, really. The Commons Committee have sort of been requesting stuff, and there's been and some of the committees saying, well, you know, we can't exactly do that. So I think it needs to be a joint process. But I think the Commons Committee really have to sort of be the ones who have almost have the final say as the representative of the shareholder on that one. So thank you very much for that. Any further questions on this section before we move on? But as I say, I think from this, the two actions are to ask Assurance Lincolnshire to draw up a work plan to monitor the delivery of these recommendations, and for the Commons Committee to be cited this report for their feedback. So we'll take those forward. So Alan, over and on to the next report then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the next report was the medium-term financial planning. This audit resulted in a substantial assurance, which is a positive opinion and the highest opinion we provide, with only 2 low recommendations being agreed with management. So these related to just ensuring that the budget proposals are explicitly linked to the corporate plan, and then provide this reference, and also that the council introduces validating savings as actuals as opposed to just the forecast only. So again, I'll pause there for any questions on this one.
Thanks very much. Has any member of the committee got any questions on that? On the audit, on the medium-term financial plan? No, can't see anybody. Have you got anything, Richard, got anything to add on that? Thank you.
Not specifically, just to note really that the integration of the corporate plan and the budget proposal, obviously when Audit were doing this work, they were looking back at 21-22, and the corporate plan, if you recall, was only adopted by council in October 20. So there was still some alignment to be done at that time. So the one we're just going through this year, which will be the 22-23 budget process, is far closer aligned than it had been previously, because the corporate plan was quite late in its adoption. In respect of the savings, again, when this audit was undertaken, there were a broader range of savings that were built into the budget, and members of FEDCO will be aware that we've had quite a few conversations during the year about some of the difficulty of delivering those savings. The proposals that are going forward to Cabinet in February and then Council have less focus on savings in terms of a specific plan. So again, whilst that's been noted, it's not such a priority for the council for next year.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Okay, can't see anybody with hands up. So I think it was okay with that. So Aaron, if you want to move on, thank you.
Apologies, that's the end of the progress report and those 2 reports. So you're happy to move on to the next agenda item, which is the follow-up, or is there anything further?
Just have a look at agenda item 5. I don't think there's any specific recommendations, are there, on this? It's just us considering it, but if members are happy with the two suggestions regarding the Companies Committee, one that we asked Assurance Lincolnshire to draw up a plan, and that the Companies Committee see a report. I don't know if we have to take a vote on it, but I think most people I'm seeing consensus on that one. So thanks very much. So yes, so thanks. So we can move on now to agenda item 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the follow-up review that was conducted, follow-up 3 within the year. As mentioned during the progress report, follow-up 4 will come to the next committee. So as this follow-up 3, we followed up a total of 20 actions. From this, we confirmed that 6 were fully implemented, 2 partially implemented, 7 not implemented at the time of the audit, and 5 we didn't have any evidence provided for, so we removed these from the figures within the report. As a result of this, we issued a little progress opinion. This is just due to the amount outstanding still within the review, and also in line with Appendix A as part of this report, the amount that were outstanding plus the priorities of the actions still remaining. So I'll pause there for any questions on the follow-up report.
Thanks very much. Has anybody got any questions on agenda item 6? Can't see any hands up. I've just got one question to. It's probably Alan's the person to answer this. It's regarding the appointment of head of communications. I understand the report says the recruitment for the position is being actively pursued at the moment. So I think comms is a really important area of the council. Just wondering if the deputy chief exec has got an update on that appointment, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So as many members will know, that we did recently go out to advertisement for a communications manager following the revision of the corporate restructure. So we revised it down from a head of communications down to a communications manager. On this occasion, we did conduct interviews for the post. However, we weren't successful in making an appointment on this occasion. So we are currently contemplating the options again before either going back out to the market or looking at options within the council for the role. But I fully appreciate, communications is absolutely vital and is a critical part of what we do as a council.
Thanks very much. Councillor Wood.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I noticed the report says on housing, on the follow-up, that seems to be very little progress has been made. I'm looking at Craig. Some of the actions haven't been. I mean, I understand from my own talks with housing that quite good progress is being made on housing. So I don't know if Craig would like to respond to this audit report, really.
Yes, I'm happy to report back. I mean, obviously, Management Action 3 talks about the void policy. We adopted the void policy at Cabinet earlier this month, so that's 2 months ahead of schedule with regards to the audit action plan. The void process is something that's being discussed at our weekly and monthly void meetings and is part of our continuous improvement exercises. We've made fantastic inroads into our performance with voids, reducing them from 113 when I started in November down to 47 last week. And obviously the other actions are with regards to recharge policies. We have that on our policy framework, which is due to come to Cabinet at the end of March. Again, that will be meeting the deadlines within this document. The recharge policy is listed about 4 or 5 times across a number of different actions there. So obviously, once we produce the recharge policy, the training of the staff and the implementation of that policy would cascade from that point. So I'd like to suggest that we're making quite strong progress on all of those.
If I could just follow up on that. A lot of the management actions, then you give a date of March 22. Is that a realistic date? I mean, obviously you don't want to say a date if you can't actually meet it. Is that a realistic target for achieving a lot of those actions?
It is, yes. We already have the void policy ratified and agreed at Cabinet last week. That's now fully in progress with the relet standard. Once we get the recharge policy adopted, we will then be able to implement the recharges as part of that As part of our current and revised void workflow, we're already undertaking the inspections to enable us to do recharges where tenants are leaving damage or in contradiction to their tenancy agreement. So we have the information ready to then make those recharges in a positive manner moving forwards. So I'm very confident that we'll be in a position to progress on all of them.
Thank you then.
Thanks, Craig. Thank you for that. Councillor Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've just noticed that let's find it, page 43 referenced the training for the voids department has not been implemented. Have we got any update on when that's likely to take place?
Yeah, we've already identified the voids inspectors have been given the kind of the void quality standard, and that's cross-referenced against the tenancy agreement. So they're aware of what recharges would be levied at our tenants. The actual charging mechanics will be part of the policy, and that will be down to finance to then implement those and to attach those to the accounts. So the actual training of the staff has been complete. We just need to adopt the policy moving forward.
Yes.
Well, the policy is going to be on the forward plan for the 29th of March. The policy will be on the forward plan for cabinet approval on the 29th of March.
Thanks, Craig. Councillor Rice-Oxley.
Hello. Yes, so on 38 in the conclusion, it says demonstrated little progress in implementing. And I can see from page 46 that that's a sort of technical term to do with exactly what percentage of the recommendations have been implemented. So I'm just wondering, obviously I didn't see this originally, if we know why that is. Were the dates on the original recommendations, were they wildly optimistic, or have there been, I mean, obviously there's been terrible circumstances recently, you know, is this a COVID thing? And I was going to, again, what Councillor Wood was saying about, are these dates now realistic? So when this comes back, are these all going to be implemented by the date set? Thank you.
Craig, thanks.
I think I've just given assurance around the housing related aspects of those. So yes, I'm sure that I've got every confidence in those being delivered. I suppose others in the room can probably answer the other recommendations and actions.
Is there anybody else who wants to comment on that? Councillor Rice-Oxley.
I just mean to say that I want the officers to have the support they need to achieve. I don't want them to be set deadlines which are unrealistic, so I don't think that's fair on them. Thank you.
Just for clarity, Mr. Chairman, the deadlines are set by management themselves. They're not imposed on management. They're in accordance with auditors as to what's realistic, given the capacity they've got and prioritisation given to those actions.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for clarifying that. Is that Councillor Rice-Oxley, are you happy with that response?
I just think avoiding a report that comes back saying little progress, and how can we help? What do we need to put in place to make sure that we don't get another report? So it's a bit of like a school report that says could do better, isn't it? And I don't think we should be getting those, and I don't think the officers deserve that.
Craig again.
Yeah, I think if you note that none of the actions have currently kind of surpassed their kind of expiry date, and I think it's just about making sure that we've got the plans in place to do that. And I think we've tried to provide that assurance here today around that. But I understand the comment. It does look that, you know, we've got 8 or 9 actions that are coming towards the end of life at the end of March, so we do need to move on them. But I'd like to assure that we are.
I mean, just for clarity, Mr. Chairman, some of these have missed the original dates that were agreed by the committee, and I think that's the point that's being made. If dates have been agreed to by management and the auditor, then there is an expectation that management will see those through, but there's also a reality check that sometimes other priorities get in the way, and capacity within the teams means, unfortunately, it can't be delivered in the timescale. And I think some of these are evidence of where original dates haven't been met. That's why Audit have gone in and done the follow-up. But Craig's clearly given assurance today that the revised dates that are presented today will be met. And of course, in the process of assurance linkage here, then you'll get that reassurance the next time the follow-up's undertaken.
Yes, thanks, Richard, for that. Again, obviously, will be Assurance Lincolnshire who will be picking up these after the 1st of April, well, on the 1st of April. Before I close this item, has anybody else got any questions or comments they want to make? No, I can't see any, so I think we're all happy with agenda item 6. So, Aaron, thank you, and thanks, Aaron, thanks to RSM for presenting these reports. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers, Chair.
Okay, next item on the agenda, agenda item 7, is the Counter Fraud Framework 2022 to 2024. Not sure which officer is going to, or Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is the updated counter fraud framework for the period 2022 to 2024. This is within the terms of reference of the committee. This has been reviewed and updated in conjunction with the Lincolnshire Counter Fraud Partnership, which is a collaborative partnership across Lincolnshire, and all authorities contribute financially to that resource that's hosted by the County Council. And we've also worked alongside Assurance Lincolnshire and other partners across Lincolnshire to make sure we've got some consistency and uniformity in the framework going forward. And for members that have been on the committee a little longer, will hopefully reflect that this framework, in terms of the way it's presented and the way it's been laid out, is a lot more user-friendly than perhaps we've seen in previous versions. And that's deliberate to ensure we do get engagement with the document from all stakeholders. It's split into several components. There's a counter fraud strategy, which integrates it with the corporate plan and also sets out clearly the council's zero tolerance towards fraud and any counter fraud actions that may be undertaken within the council and to the council. It also has the counter fraud anti-corruption policy, which is a requirement under the regulations. Also contains whistleblowing policy, the fraud response plan, which is how the council reacts and responds to allegations. And then finally, the anti-money laundering policy, which again is another regulation requirement. In respect of the fraud response plan and the whistleblowing, we've set out as well flow charts so members can see and guide their way through how the council, once it receives information, follows a process. And it is important that everybody, both within the organisation and anybody acting on behalf of the organisation, follows that process to the letter, because it ensures we've got robust audit trails, and it also ensures that we've got consistency of approach as any issues come forward. So that's just for reference, we reference something called a statutory officer group, and for any members not familiar with that terminology, that's the 3 statutory officers of the council, which is the chief executive, the monitoring officer, and the 151 officer, and they meet on a monthly basis to be the eyes and ears of the authority in terms of governance, and also to monitor any such accusations that are received by the council. And we have talked here previously about how the whistleblowing process works, and we give stats and updates, and as members know, that's hosted on our behalf by the County Council. So the document's here today for review and approval. Hopefully, once it has been agreed today, we will then work with officers and teams across the council to embed it to ensure that we've got consistency. And during, again, the terms of reference to this committee, we'll be reporting regularly on updates in respect of this particular item. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, Richard. Any questions? Councillor Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you give me some examples of where we would take, I noticed cash payments, no cash payment to the council will be accepted if it exceeds £1,000. Can I have a few examples? Because it's getting to the point these days where we use so very little cash. Why would that sort of figure be put in the first instance? I mean, I would hope that we are deterring as much cash as possible, but equally, I accept that payment is payment, and far better that we have that. But it would be useful to understand the circumstances of that particular point.
Absolutely, it's a rarity in, if you like, this current environment that we would see cash anyway coming through the authority. I think previously we've had an internal audit looking at the cash arrangements, and we gave some assurances about the minimal amount of cash that's coming through the building anyway. That's there as a kind of check against anti-money laundering, and clearly if people are presenting literally thousands of pounds in notes, then that kind of makes you feel that there's something not quite right. Clearly we have detection processes in place that would allow us to scrutinise those notes to seek our own assurance, and ultimately the bank would be doing the same, but it's there as a kind of threshold to say that our alarm bells would ring if that money of that value is coming through as cash rather than a bank transfer or any other kind of automated process.
So thanks, Richard. Councillor Woolley again, follow up.
For completeness, Chairman, I wonder if, as I say, examples where there's a large amount of cash.
That could be a situation where somebody's facing either the bailiffs or an eviction, and they would literally come into the building and present the money to eliminate that debt, to stop the council pursuing the debt further. It could be a business rate payer who's again facing some recovery action, who comes into the building to repay their debt. Clearly that sort of amount you could get to quite quickly. A council tax bill typically is well over that sort of figure. So it's those sort of examples, particularly where there's recovery action that's getting to the business end of implementation, be it bailiff or eviction, that would trigger potentially a response like that, where somebody literally would come in with money. And we've seen that in the past. We've had examples where people have come in with notes and coinage and goodness knows what to stop a process.
Thanks, Richard. Just on this, because I'm picking up from what you're saying that this really is the exception rather than the rule. But I mean, you know, you talking about the £1,000 threshold. But if you did have somebody who say had a debt to the council, say 1,200, and came with cash, would we? I presume we'd still take it. And yeah, thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much. Councillor Wood.
Right, thank you, Tim. Yeah, I welcome this. It's great. We always need to be on top of fraud. I'd like to thank Tracy for doing it. I know you've been working on it for quite a long while over the years, haven't you, Tracy? But it's a good document. It says it covers the years 22 to 24. I am conscious that fraud, counter fraud, we need to be on top of all the time. So is it a working document that gets reviewed periodically? Presumably we don't just leave it in place until 24. Do we look at it yearly or something like that, just to keep it up to date? Because counter fraud is you've got to be on top of the situation. It's an ongoing thing. But thank you for producing it, and that's great. But if you could answer the question, thank you.
We do keep an eye on it, and particularly if there's any legislation changes, it would be updated accordingly. But good practice is every 2 years. But yeah, we keep it under constant review.
Good.
Thanks, Councillor Wood. I think this is a very, very good document as well. I particularly like the flow diagrams, because I think they're really easy to follow. You can actually sort of see how the process works and everything. And I want to sort of talk about a question around whistleblowing and how the whistleblowing works, because there has recently been a case where the whistleblowing did actually work regarding a former member of staff. So I'm just wondering if either that it's the one that got into the newspapers recently. I was wondering if Tracy Richard can sort of indicate how the policy worked in that case and what the lessons learned from it were, because that I think that'd be quite useful to provide some context for the committee as to the success of the policy. Thank you.
Yeah, so give the example of the fuel theft without going into the details of the individuals. That's the one that was recently publicised, particularly in the local media and the local press. So that was a whistleblowing that was received via the hotline in May 2020. it was received and taken seriously. The statutory officer group met and considered the accusation. Clearly, sometimes these accusations are quite wide-ranging. It's quite difficult to get specifics from some of the information that's been received, and there was some to and froing with the individual. We don't always get the individual's details, but on that occasion we did, so we could tease out a bit more information. In June 20, we logged it as a potential crime with the local authority, local police, and we also instigated a independent fraud investigation working with a neighbouring authority who undertook an investigation. The individuals were arrested in July 2020, and it was logged with the CPS a year later. Actually, there's quite a big time lag between the police receiving it and processing it through. Clearly, that was in the whole COVID period as well, so you'll appreciate there were other distractions, but it did go to the CPS, and ultimately there was a sentence levied in December 21. So the findings of the investigation that the council undertook were reported back to the staff officer group, and just to give members a flavour of some of the issues that were identified and have since been put in place was around access to fuel. If members may be aware, the council has a fuel tank of its own down at the depot, so we can spot buy significant volumes of fuel. And that's on the, if anyone goes to Civic Tip, you'll see the fuel tanks on the side of the road. So there was a limitation put on the frequency in which drivers could access the fuel tank. The actual fob to the fuel tank is now kept with a supervisor, so use of it is kept under close control. The big issue with identifying this actually was the consumption, miles per gallon consumption, which was very erratic on this particular vehicle and was significantly lower than you would expect for a vehicle of that nature. So there are now monitoring tracks in place and spot checks undertaken on the fuel by the fleet supervisor down at the depot to ensure that fuel consumption with each of the vehicles is consistent with the type of vehicle and the number of miles that vehicle is doing. There's also CCTV camera that was installed, which is directly honed in on the fuel tank itself. And clearly some of this was around the culture of the team and the kind of blind eye perception that some people knew something was not right, but didn't feel compelled or able to come forward with their concerns. So there's been a lot of work done with the head of service down there with the team to ensure the culture is such that people will come forward, but equally that it's clearly made that it's a zero tolerance approach the council will take. It takes that kind of thing very seriously, and there are significant consequences for the individual if found to be the case. This was all done by on behalf of not only the fraud investigation team, but also RSM were invited in once those checks and internal control changes have been made, and internal audit were brought in to validate whether those controls were embedded, but also working effectively. And I think it's one area that we would continue to encourage is on the audit plan, because it clearly will always remain a high risk, and particularly in the current environment that a lot of people find themselves in terms of pressures in their own kind of financial environment, and also fuel prices at that time were escalating significantly as well. So it remains a kind of high risk area for us. So we would always encourage that we more routinely look at areas such as this as part of our audit plan. So that's just a flavour of how we responded to the concern raised, and it led through to individuals getting custodian sentences and significant improvements made in that area. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, Richard. I think that's really positive. I think that's a real good example of how a good whistleblowing policy can actually work. And I'm really pleased again that you emphasise the point that the council has a zero tolerance approach to any form of fraud. I think that's really, really important. That something is everybody knows exactly where we stand on this, because after all, every penny we spend is public money, and as custodians of public money, we have to make really, really sure our policies and procedures are as tight as they can be to prevent fraud. Has anybody else got anything questions or comments before we move to the recommendation?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to propose we accept the framework.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wood. Have I got a seconder for that, please? Councillor Johnson, I saw your hand go first, but thank you, Councillor Smith. All those in favour, please indicate. I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, move on to agenda item 8, which is, I can find it in my papers. Yes, the financial management code. So passing over to Richard Wiles on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a code that's been introduced by SIPFA across all local government to ensure that financial matters are given more prominence and the ownership of the financial matters of the authority are shared by all stakeholders, both members and officers. And the code was really formed from the sector going through some difficult times in terms of austerity. Members will know a number of councils have declared Section 114 notices, which is effectively saying that they're almost close to bankruptcy if local authorities can get into that world, but clearly in terms of restricting the operating expenditure of councils, and there's still examples of that happening in today's world as well. So the code was formed to ensure that there are better processes in place across authorities, and finance isn't just seen as the accountants down the bottom of the corridor. It's actually owned and lived and breathed by everybody. When the code was introduced, we took a gap analysis of the code requirements against what our working practices were, and we brought that to the committee last June as a position statement at that time, and we agreed with the committee an action plan of the areas that were that needed more focus and where we were identifying we were needing more work to be undertaken. So this is still work in progress. The code obviously will be reviewed and updated all the time, so it won't be almost a finish point and then it ends. It will continue to evolve as we go forward. But we've identified the actions that have been undertaken since we last spoke about this. And at the end of the report on page 89, I've lifted the focus of the next part of this journey, which is in respect to the local code, which the head of Democratic and the Deputy Chief Executive are working on. And on tomorrow's agenda, there's further updates on the constitutional changes that are necessary. The development of resilience scenario planning, and that's really stress testing the medium-term financial plan. Members who may have seen the budget papers thus far will see we haven't got a balanced position beyond next year. So this is about exposing what scenarios we need to be implementing to ensure financially we're sustainable beyond 12-month period, which is difficult in the context of a one-year settlement, but nevertheless we've got to kind of amplify it out into the medium term to understand what that challenge may look like. There are changes to the Treasury Code that we'll talk about more at the next agenda item in terms of what's been changed for the Prudential Code, and this is where the government and the sector are raising their concerns around borrowing for commercial and the tightening up of that activity that's obviously left some councils vulnerable as a result of buying shopping centres, retail parks and hotels and such like. So there's a real restriction now on borrowing for that activity. Also about whether or not there's volatility on our balance sheet and whether we should be reporting that more frequently as well in terms of the net worth of the authority, and where we're seeing some changes on that, whether we've considered that appropriate to report that to members. A partnership register. Clearly, this council works with multiple partners, but it's understanding what those risks are and are those risks shared, and is the accountability of the partnership clearly understood and the terms of reference are identified. So there's work around that we're doing. And then finally, which will be coming back to this committee, reviewing the contract procedure rules and reviewing the financial regulations, which again are a key part of the Constitution. And will nicely support the review of the Constitution as well. So lots more to do, but in terms of where we are today, progress has been made, but clearly there's another version of this still to come.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Richard, for that. I mean, I'll just make a few comments in one of my other roles as chair of the Constitution Committee, because obviously quite a number of these sort of issues around schemes of delegations and things are going to full council tomorrow with recommendation that the new scheme of delegation is agreed by council, which does cover elements of this. And as parts of going forward of the constitution review, I think I believe that the contract procedure rules and regulations will go into the next meeting of this committee in March, prior to going to Constitution Committee, and then for agreement by full council, hopefully in May. And I take the point, Richard, around the difficulties of sort of balancing the budget beyond 1 year when government only gives you a 1 year financial settlement. And so I appreciate the difficulties there. I'm just hoping that sort of next year we actually do get a bit more clarity from government around a sort of a longer settlement period, which I think will help everybody. So those are my sort of initial comments. But has any member of the committee got any questions they wish to raise? Councillor Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate that probably it's not completely practical, but I'm just wondering whether we could perhaps have a few dates on some of these actions. But obviously, when something's moving feast, that might be a little difficult. But I think there's one or two of these actions, at least, that we could really perhaps get some timelines on. You know, just as an example, there's a point here about the formal partnerships, and you know, reading through that, it's a case of right, well, absolutely fine, completely agree with it. So when's it going to happen? So I think we could just have a few dates. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Woolley. Richard, yeah, I was going to suggest that. So I think some dates would be useful, and also potentially if you sort of think when you've been in a position to sort of bring an updated report back as well. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Just the comment above those bullets just says in the next 6 months. So it's the focus for us for the next 6 months will be those bullets. Our expectation is when we come back here again in June, July, it depends on the calendar kind of tells us when we come back, those will be updated at that point. So we will be finding updates on those.
Thank you. Councillor Woolley again.
Thank you. If I may just come back on that, Chairman. So are we going to ask for an update for whenever the Governance and Audit Committee meet in and around July, or will that automatically happen as an update?
Sorry, it'll automatically update every 6 months. I think that's what we agreed at a previous meeting, that I'll bring 6 monthly updates for this. My expectation is they will be done and they'll be presented at that meeting.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. In your case, Councillor Woolley. Thank you. Councillor Rice-Oxley.
Thank you. Just on page 92, so Financial Management Standard A, which is about services providing value for money. So it says just right at the end of that section, it says the council will continue to review its delivery models to ensure they remain fit for purpose, provide value for money, and meet customer needs and expectations. I was just wondering if I could have some clarity around how often these things are reviewed and what level of detail, methods used, what's the mechanism for reporting that to council, and in the case of just the bullet above that, the 100% owned council company models, do we have some external benchmarking used to ensure the cost effectiveness of that delivery? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice-Oxley. Richard?
Yeah, so the essence of that point is saying that where we've strayed outside of a normal service delivery model, which is the council providing services from it within itself, we need to ensure that over time we stress test and review whether or not that's the most effective delivery model. And I think as a good example, Environment SK yesterday at Companies Committee was being debated, and options will be presented in the future about whether as a delivery model that's the most appropriate form. And that's an example of where the council is challenging itself as to whether a delivery model that was set up right for that time is still the most appropriate way of doing so. And Invest SK exactly the same example, really. The rationale being that served a purpose at that period, but actually going forward, there are different ways that those same outcomes can be delivered, but not in the same format. Benchmarking is a good example, but for grounds maintenance, clearly there is a market for grounds maintenance in the private sector. So that comparison of cost about whether the council did it itself as an in-house service, whether an under 100% owned company is the best model, or whether it's better placed with the private sector, that benchmarking and cost comparison will be done to enable the council to make an informed choice.
Yes, thank you very much, Richard. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments on this item? before we move to the recommendation? I can't see any. So back to page 85. And recommendation is that the Governance and Audit Committee is asked to note the progress being made in respect of the Financial Management Code Action Plan. So this is just an item to note, but with but it'll come back before this committee in 6 months' time. So whenever the meeting for midsummer is, I can't remember if it's June or July, but at our meeting. So thank you very much, Richard, and on that one. So over now to agenda item 9, which is, if I can find it, the Treasury Management and the Treasury Management Strategy. Is that you, Alison? Okay, over to Alison, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report provides a review of the Treasury Management activity to the 30th of September 2021 and the draft Treasury Management Strategy statement for 22-23, which will be presented to Council for approval on the 3rd of March this year. Both of these reports ensure that the Council meets the reporting requirements of the SIP Code of Treasury Management and the Prudential Code. I'll initially focus on the Treasury Management update for the current financial year. So paragraphs 2.1 and 2.2 on page 106 provide information regarding the borrowing activity during the first half of the year, and it confirms that no additional borrowing has been undertaken. Further information of the outstanding loans is provided in Appendix A on page 112, along with the repayment profile for the outstanding loans. The borrowing level is within the limits approved by Council in March 2021. Paragraph 2.2 details that £3.2 million of the outstanding borrowing is repayable within the next 12 months over 2 instalments, one in March and one in September. These repayments are included in the financial plans of the Council. Paragraphs 2.3 to 2.8 on pages 106 and 107 provide information regarding the cash investments of the Council. As detailed in paragraph 2.5, the Council held £84.3 million of short-term investments and £3 million of long-term investments at the 30th of September. And again, page 112 of Appendix A provides a more detailed breakdown of these investments. Just to update members, as this, obviously the 30th of September was a few months ago, as of last Friday, we held £96.8 million in short-term investments and £5 million in long-term investments. All investments have been placed in accordance with the advice received from Linked Treasury Solutions, who are our Treasury advisors, and the investment limits were within those approved by Council on the 1st of March 2021. I'll now move on to the Treasury Strategy statement for 22-23. So pages 4.1 to 4.5 on page 108 provide information regarding the strategy, which details the cash investment and borrowing policies that the Council will follow during the financial year. As detailed in paragraph 4.2, the strategy details the counterparties that the Council will invest with and the limits that can be invested. There are no proposed changes to these investment limits agreed in the 21-22 strategy, as the current limits are considered sufficient to enable the Council to achieve a diversified portfolio of cash investments to ensure that risk is spread. SIPFA have recently completed a consultation of the Treasury Management and Prudential Codes, which the Council will be formally required to adopt in 23-24. I can confirm that any implications from these changes will be summarised in the final version of the strategy, which will be presented to Council in March. The consultation proposes that the frequency of reporting should be amended. So rather than half yearly, the Council will be required to report Treasury Management activity on a quarterly basis. Members should also note that the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities is proposing to update regulations to restrict authorities from investing in commercial projects specifically for yield, which is consistent with the Public Works Loan Board, which already has these restrictions in place, as the council is not able to borrow if commercial projects are included in the approved capital programme. The main change to the Treasury strategy, detailed in Appendix B, is the change to the borrowing indicators, which have been amended to reflect the borrowing associated with the Deepings Leisure Centre project. So all of the borrowing tables have been amended to reflect the £10.6 million associated with this project. So if members were to turn to page 119, you will see the table at the top of the page. The expected change in debt in 22-23 is £10.6 million, which, as I said, is to reflect the capital expenditure that's expected to be incurred. And then the operational boundary and the authoriser limits detailed on pages 119 and 120, which reflect the long and short-term limits the council can afford to borrow, have also been increased to reflect this borrowing requirement. The council is also required to have a minimum revenue provision statement, which is detailed on page 129 of the reports pack, and details that the council will use the asset life method for all new borrowing, which means that MRP will be charged over the life of the asset. So to summarise, all current year cash investments and borrowing are within the agreed limits of the approved Treasury management strategy. And the main change to the proposed strategy is to the borrowing indicators for next financial year, which have been increased to reflect the borrowing requirements of the Deepings Leisure Centre capital project. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison. Has any member got any questions on that? Councillor Wood.
Thank you. Yeah, Alison, thank you for all the details. I was just a little bit, whether you could explain, we've got quite a lot of money on short-term investments. I think it says in here 84, but it says it's 90 something million. Why do we then have why do we borrow money and not use that short-term investments? If we, because I noticed on you said short-term investments, yes, that's historic. We've got like £3 million we're paying back. That's short-term borrowing, but we've actually got short-term investments of 90 something million. So am I missing? I'm probably missing something off here. Could you just explain why we don't just use some of that borrowing to pay for the investments rather than borrow money?
Prior to undertaking any new borrowing, we'll review the cash balances we've got, and we will sometimes choose to internally borrow. So, for example, the St Martin's Park project, we internally borrowed for that, for the purchase of that asset. But what that enables us to do is we're not using our existing resources. It enables us to take out external borrowing in the future. So we'll internally borrow in the short term because borrowing rates are higher than our investment rates. But as I say, we don't want to necessarily permanently use resources, but it does secure the ability for us to borrow in the long term. So for the Deepings Leisure Centre project, we could choose to internally borrow, but we need to have our limits still need to be amended to enable the council to internally borrow from its own cash resources. So you are right, that is a cheaper form of borrowing, because borrowing from the Public Works Loan Board might be approximately 2% at the minute, whereas on our cash investments, we're probably getting around 0.6%.
Mr. Chairman, I think specifically you're talking about paragraph 2.2, which is where when the council undertook the borrowing it needed for the HRA self-financing, this is where that debt falls into the 12-month category. So that was a 25-year debt profile. So each year the council is paying EIP on that loan. So that's the borrowing that's been referred to there, where the council is repaying the debt it took out to effectively buy its own council properties from the government.
Thanks very much, Alison. Thanks very much, Richard. as an accountant, you sort of know there's a difference between balance sheet balances and cash, and sometimes it's sort of difficult to kind of explain. But I think Alison and Richard did a very good job around that. So anybody else got any questions? Because I've got a number of questions, but see if Medical Committee's got anything to ask first. Councillor Woolley.
Just to point, Chairman, that I think you're the best one, or one of the best ones placed at the moment, certainly within the committee. Perhaps I'm being disingenuous to my colleagues, but you have the financial qualification as to whether you can suggest that we support this particular recommendation. It would be useful to just have your thoughts on this, on salient points.
Yes, so thank you, Mr. Councillor Woolley. I think, I mean, for me, it makes perfect sense. The policy that we have to keep a lot of our funding in short-term investments, it means it's fairly easy access. And of course, at the moment, it doesn't really matter if you're investing money short or long-term, the interest rates are still pretty poor anyway. So there's no real difference between doing that. And of course, it enables us to manage our cash a lot better if things are on fairly easy access. And I'm sure Alison and Richard could probably comment a little bit more on that. And again, there's always a balance between internal borrowing and external. The Public Works Loan Board are cutting back. Well, they've increased the rate, they've increased the borrowing rate, and they've also put restrictions on which the departments are now mirroring, because of some of the local authorities who were borrowing money on to sort of fund some sort of commercial type of activity that went well beyond the normal remits of councils. We had councils buying hotels and garden centres, and I believe one council in the south bought a Mercedes-Benz garage and all kinds of stuff like that. That actually, in many respects, they could borrow cheap money at a cheaper rate than a private company could if they went to a bank. So in many respects, a lot of councils were actually getting a lot cheaper money, which is one reason why the PWLB decided to increase their rates. My question is, one of my questions is, obviously, potentially, we've got interest rates that are just starting to creep up now. I think that it's obviously been artificially low for best part of a decade now. But there are indications now that as inflation goes into the economy, that interest rates are likely to go up. So I'm just wondering potentially what impact that could have on our strategy, and what we've done to kind of identify the risk and potentially mitigate against it. So Alison or Richard, thanks.
So for investments, we've chosen to keep investments short term because the rates were low. So last September, on a 6-month investment, we were able to secure 0.3%. This month, we've been able to secure 0.6%, which is a reflection of the increase in the interest rate. We also follow the advice of the Treasury advisors. So a lot of the time we're actually capped on the duration we can actually place investments for. So with a lot of counterparties, our limit is 6 months. If we could go to 12 months, we'd compare what the rate was at the time. Was it worth investing for the additional 6 months? Because a lot of the time the rates may be 0.05% higher. Whereas if we've proven by delaying by a couple of months, we can actually double the interest rate on it.
Yes, thanks, Alison. Yeah, because obviously with interest rates going up, it doesn't make sense to lock anything in for more than 6 months, really, because potentially if you lock in at a lower rate for 2 years, well, you've got a low rate for 2 years. So I think at the moment, with interest rates going up, the best policy is to keep the money, the investments, as liquid as possible, so we can access them easily, fairly easily, because I think things are going to sort of be returning more towards some sort of normality. my second question is around counterparty risks. And, excuse me, what do we do? I mean, what's the sort of the ratings, what minimum ratings do we have when we're deciding upon counterparties? Because I know obviously you've got companies like Fitch and Moody's who assess all these counterparties. So what are our sort of, are we only interested in AAA, or are we okay with A or A minus? Just some flavour around that. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. We will we invest with counterparties in accordance with the advice we receive from Link. So Link take everything into consideration and then provide us with a scaling of who we should and shouldn't invest with. And table A on page 132 details the maximum limits that we will invest with each counterparty. So we would invest in accordance with those limits, and also on advice we receive from Link as well. So prior to placing an investment with a new counterparty, we will always approach them and ask them for their view first before placing the investment.
Okay, Alison, thanks very much. Any further questions before we move to the recommendation? No. Okay, so we've got two recommendations. It is recommended the members of the Governance and Audit Committee note and approve the contents of the mid-year review of Treasury Management activity for 21-22 and recommends to Council the 22-23 Treasury Management Strategy. Obviously, I think as Alison has just said, it is still just being tweaked finally, but I think the one that's before us is largely the one that will go to full Council in March. So do I have a proposal for that? Thank you, Councillor Wood. Do I have a second? Councillor Smith, can we members take a vote on that? All those in favour, please indicate. Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members. The next agenda item is agenda item 10, which is the Planning Services Review Progress Report, and I believe that Emma is going to present this report. Thank you. Oh, or is it Ken?
It's me,
Ken. Okay, sorry, Ken.
Chairman. Thank you very much. So I'm sure Emma will come in shortly and answer some of the questions. But so yeah, just as an update really to the committee following the report that we brought in July, on the progress of the planning review, as you'd asked for an update. So just as a background, the planning review was undertaken during 2020. Which fed back a range of actions to us, and largely they fell into two categories. So the first was around embedding good practice in operational delivery. So that's all about the officer service delivery. And the second was around protocols and practices of the planning committee. So how the planning committee operates. And you'll see in Annex A a table of these actions and the progress against them. Now, at the last committee, the governance that we brought back to governance and audit in July, the committee were broadly comfortable with the officer actions, and they were ongoing and many of them complete. And those were in the first section of Annex A, and those have continued to progress. But the committee expressed some concerns around the protocol and processes of the committee, which were in the second half. And there was particular concern about the consultation and involvement of members and the planning committee in particular with that. So really, the main thing I want to point you to is section 2 of the report, which shows the consultation and the engagement that's taken place in between then and now. And just to say, Emma, who is obviously sitting right in front of me, has really led that consultation with the planning committee since then, and to develop a set of protocols and processes that both reflect best practice, but also the context of South Kesteven District Council, which I think was some of the concern of committee and of members. So so before Christmas already seems like quite a long time ago, but there was a couple of really positive sessions before Christmas that took those forward. And just to say really, thank you to the committee for their positive engagement with that, but also Emma for the way in which she has has led that, and William C, who has moved on to a different role since he wrote this report, but who has kind of overseen those things going forward. So looking forward to the future. So officer actions, as you can see, largely complete. The minor things that are left are an action plan behind them to take them forward. With regards to the actions around the protocols and processes, as you know, they impact on the constitution of the council. So the plan is to take that into Constitution Committee in March and then on to full council after that. So hopefully the report provides an overview of progress. And as I say, Emma or I will be happy to take any questions, but just to say to the committee, thank you for the feedback last time, and hopefully you can see from the progress that has been made since then that feedback's been useful in shaping the next steps that have gone forward. So thanks very much, and over to any questions.
So thank you very much indeed, Ken. Again, before we ask questions, I, as chairman of the Constitution Committee, I took an interest in the work you've just indicated. I couldn't attend the first planning committee meeting to discuss the review, but I watched it subsequently online and did attend the second one. And actually, it was just a model for me. It was just a model way of how a good consultation between officers and members of the committee should work. A report went to September, which Emma presented. Members then provided lots of feedback on it. Emma and the team took it away, came back with another report in November, which addressed a lot of the members' concerns. So I think it really is, for me, watching the process, because I was just, as chairman of the Constitution Committee, I was just interested in watching the process, to follow the process through, because I'd always said that I thought that the planning committee were a key consultee in this. And I was really, really pleased to see the work as it progressed. So many thanks, Emma, for that, and also William. For me, it was just a model way in which good consultation should work. And as I say, something that I thought potentially might cause the Constitution review a few problems has actually been dealt with in a really, really professional way. So many thanks. So after that, has any member of the committee got any questions? Councillor Rice Oxley.
Yeah, just really enjoyed reading this report. Like you've just said, it seems to be a really, really thorough piece of work. Everyone's been involved. Sounds like everyone worked really well together, incredibly productive, and the recommendations that have come out of the action plan is so thorough, and I congratulate you. I'd just be interested to know from Emma, so obviously some of these things have been completed in recent months, what your initial sort of overview is of what you think initially has changed following the implementation of some of these actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you. I can't take all the credit because obviously some of these predated my appointment. But what I've seen is, I think, a much more settled planning team in terms of having leadership, direction, more sort of certainty over sort of processes. There is still work to be done. You can't ever rest on your laurels either. You've always got to continuously reflect on how you're doing things and whether it's best practice, whether there's a better way that we could be doing things in terms of processes. I did watch a number of planning committees before I joined the authority, and obviously have watched or sat in on most of them subsequently. And I think it's a much better working relationship between officers and members as well, which I'm pleased to report. And I think that we're making some good decisions. I think we're asking good questions. I think the engagement is much better, both during the meeting, but also ahead of the meeting as well. So I think some of the tensions that there may have been previously between officers and members in terms of the committee and how it worked, I think they are in a much better place sort of moving forwards, really. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Chairman. So I was just wondering if, given this has gone so well, and that sounds brilliant, do we have any sort of review of the review? Is there a lessons learned report? Can we review what they did in terms of timescale, who they involved, how many meetings, how it was done? Because if you do something really well, let's capture it and say that went really well. you know, because there might be other scenarios and other areas of service that you could then apply that framework to.
Yes, that's actually. I think that's an excellent point because as I said, for me, just watching from the outside, it was just a real model way of how to do a process involving officers and members. So I don't, if anybody wants to comment on that, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. So I think that's a really good point, and we're constantly learning. That's the way these things are, isn't it? And I think, Chairman, you'll see from one of your other roles that some of that's been picked up in the work that Mr. Watts has done with the constitutional review. And as we've talked today, the constitutional review has come up in, I think, 3 or 4 of the papers. So we've got a lot of work to do, haven't we, between now and May, and learning from the success of this work. Will certainly be fed into that. And I know there's certainly been one of the things that's definitely been learnt is that comprehensive list of stakeholders who need to be consulted with on formally and informally as we go through the process. And I think for me, that's the big learning point that's come out of this, is that if we go slowly, we can move more quickly at the end, because we build that trust, we get the processes in place, and then once we start making those changes to the way we work, it gets real momentum, doesn't it? And I think from an officer point of view, I've seen that certainly in the Constitution Committee, and hopefully come May, we'll have a really a high quality updated Constitution that we all understand and we all follow, and we get rid of any ambiguity, and it keeps us safe from any challenges. So that certainly, yeah, the learning is absolutely vital from anything like this.
Thanks indeed, Alan. I believe the Councillor Cook's got some comments as well. Thank you.
No, thank you, Chairman. And I think, we need to really acknowledge the people that have been involved in this work. And obviously it started with the late Councillor Bob Adams, because I know him as obviously planning chair was crucial to the improvement into the service. And I know when he was appointed to the role, it was very key that we made improvements to our planning service, because we all knew the challenges that it did have. And we'll, of course, continue to have moving forwards. But I think, as Emma's already said, and Alan, the relationship amongst the members and officers is much stronger now. And I think the working, the way in which the members are working is much more proactive, with up-to-date practices. It's not, and it wasn't about taking away powers from individual elected members, but actually just making sure that in many occasions, the right decisions were being taken in terms of how it goes to committee, what goes to committee, the experience, and also, if we're ever to be challenged in a judicial review, that we know we've got the right practices behind us in terms of the decisions that committee is making. So I know the team have done an incredible amount on this, and obviously we look forward to it continuing to improve.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cook. Before I call in Councillor Woolley, certainly in terms of lessons learned, in many respects, the consultation that we initially undertook around the planning service review, we tried to do with the rest of the Constitution in terms of engaging as many stakeholders as we possibly could, and having workshops with members and that sort of thing. And in the papers going to full council tomorrow, the part of those papers will include a timetable for the second part of the Constitution review, which again, working on those lessons learned, has got a full timetable with all the key consultees there, because as Alan said, consultation is key around this actually. So in many respects, there are some lessons to be learned, but I think maybe when all this is over, that perhaps it might be a good idea perhaps to kind of sit back and just actually then just think to ourselves, that went really well. How can that inform how we take decisions going forward? I think that'd be really, really useful. Councillor Cook.
Just to expand on that, then I think once obviously the new protocols are in place and it's been through constitution and everything else, I think in 6 months' time we can probably do that review with the planning committee members as well to see if there is any tweaks that are needed in terms of how it's operating.
Thanks very much, Councillor Cook. I think going forward for the Constitution Committee, I think again it's going to be, the fact is that not getting into a situation again where the Constitution is so out of date that it's very hard to use. That actually there is a process of annual updates going forward, so the Constitution is never out of date, and I think that's really, really important. Councillor Woolley, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Point 18 and I'm going to mingle and get a little bit parochial, but mingle an example into this. Within the enforcement policy, probably it's best if I give you my anecdotal example. Development started to take place in my local area, and because a lot of the adjoining neighbours were grumpy anyway, because there was a lot of mud going on the road and whatever, there was something slightly unreasonable. It might have been starting times, whatever, it doesn't matter. And I spoke to the chairman of the planning committee and said, you know, is there anything that we can do about this? Is there any conversations to be had? She very speedily got in touch with the enforcement, well, somebody who in turn got the enforcement officers out. They took one look at the site and immediately stopped all work, because whatever conditions the developers were given, they weren't being adhered to. So although we got to that point, my point would be, is there any way that we can stop that from happening in the first place? I think we've got a bit of an awkward situation. You don't know what you don't know. So how would the enforcement officers know that the development had started or gone beyond the point that it should have done? But is there any way within that enforcement policy that we can look at either asking our members to, you know, if there's a development taking place, do you want to check with us that it's all signed off? Because it must be at least a month that they were stopped from doing what they should be doing. So it was obviously quite a major breach and pretty unfair on the local residents when it needn't have happened.
Thanks, Councillor. I think that's a really good point. I've had a sort of similar issue with some planning in adjacent to my ward, where it's a case of local residents contact you and say, are they doing this correctly and whatever. And I've raised issues around planning enforcement. I wonder if Emma's got any comments or views on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Planning enforcement is typically reactive, not proactive, I'm afraid. There isn't a breach until it's happened. It's the same, there isn't a crime until it's happened. So it is really difficult to prevent people from undertaking works or development ahead of seeking the appropriate permissions or consents. The developer, I know the situation that you're talking about, Councillor Woolley, and that particular developer was an experienced developer. They should have known better. They knew that they had not cleared all their pre-commencement conditions. I think they were probably taking a bit of a chance and hoping that they'd get away with it. And we did threaten enforcement action, and they voluntarily retreated from site, which saved us having to serve any form of temporary stop notices. I think we just need to make sure we take a firmer hand more frequently, and then hopefully people will start to get the message that you know, we mean business. We won't tolerate unacceptable planning breaches, but sadly it's not something you can generally stop before it happens, other than sort of send that warning message.
Thanks, Emma. Councillor Cook.
So thank you, Chairman. I just think to expand on what Councillor Woolley said, actually, because she does make a really valid point, because as a district, obviously we are a pro-growth area and we do build more homes and we do build our fair share of homes. And actually the case that she's raising, we need to hold them to account, because quite frankly, this developer is well known in this district. And quite frankly, you know, we offer a fair process coming through our planning committee. And I think they only need to operate fairly as well when they're actually developing these homes, because I'm not advocating this, but, you know, there are conditions that we can put on certain developers on certain applications should they not, you know, control the way in which they're developing, because for a lot of residents, they are sometimes reticent about development in their area, or actually they're quite happy about it. But what they don't like is what Councillor Woolley is mentioning, is where, quite frankly, they're doing stuff that they really shouldn't be, and they know better. And then they'll be coming back to us in a few months' time wanting another planning application. Well, it only takes so long before our members then get fairly annoyed with a certain developer to then want to put conditions on. And I know we've had it recently in particularly some parts of your area in North Grantham, where, you know, it's not been the finest hour for some of our developers. And, you know, we are pro-growth, but they also need to work with us. And, you know, I try and harness good relationships with these developers, but also at the same time, I can be fairly robust with them, as I'm sure hopefully our planning team are, in terms of the conditions we can put on them.
Thanks so much, Councillor. Yes, I know some of those developments you're referring to in North Grantham. Councillor Wood.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'd like to come in on that as well. But first of all, I'm really pleased with this. I think Emma should be congratulated. I think at one point on this review, we weren't actually going on the right track. And I think, Emma, you've managed to bring it back, and I'm pleased with what you've done. And I think you do deserve credit for it, to be quite honest. I think the Employment Committee made a good choice in your appointment. But talking about people, the leaders spoke about enforcement, and 18, I know Councillor Woolley has. And I must admit, I do think in the past we've not been as much on the ball with enforcement as what we should have been. And I know enforcement has been under-resourced, and we maybe not done as much as we can. But reading this, I presume now we are fully up to date, we're fully resourced, and we're more able on enforcement to take the action required, because it seems about a lot of people have said we do need enforcement when things are going wrong. And I know, Emma, you're aware of it, and I know you've taken the right action. But I suppose my question is, are you now happy that we are fully resourced on enforcement? That's my first question. My other question is, I notice a lot of the items are referring to the Constitution Committee, as the chairman has said, and also to full council. Will it come as a block to Constitution Committee and full council, or will it be done piecemeal? So those are my questions, really.
Yes, yeah, Emma, thanks.
Thank you. I'll take the last question first, if that's okay. The planning protocols and planning constitution changes, the intention is to take it on block. So it'll be one item to Constitution Committee and then subsequently to full council, where hopefully members would support it and adopt it. I'm really sorry. Could you remind me of the first point again? Sorry about the info. Oh, it was being fully staffed, wasn't it? Yes, sorry. Yes, we have recruited in the summer, so we have a new member of the team. One of the assistant enforcement officers, obviously he's still learning the ropes. We're playing a little bit of catch up in terms of COVID would have posed some restrictions in terms of site visits and our ability to deal with things as quickly as we would have liked. And we do have a number of high profile cases which are obviously diverting our attention, meaning that some of the other responses are perhaps a little bit slower than we would otherwise have liked. But no, we're fully resourced. We're working through those cases and hopefully being much more proactive in terms of dealing with enforcement cases robustly than perhaps we have been in the past. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Thank you for that. Any further questions, guys? Councillor Johnson.
I'd just like to say one thing. I have recently been substituting on planning. Never wanted to go on planning. Never at all. But I've been substituting on planning. And I started with training day. The training day was absolutely excellent. It was open. You could ask as many questions as you wanted, be it silly or not understanding. Got the right answers in the right way. Subsequently, I've been to planning meetings. They're very open, they're very easy to talk in, and it's a nice atmosphere to be in. And that is the secret. That is the secret. And obviously, Emma did my training, and she's been part of planning. She's very forthright, and she explains very, very well. So once again, I'm going to say, well done, Emma. And I think this is great. The way it's been laid out, easy to understand, easy to read. No fancy words or anything. It's really good. And once again, thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Councillor Johnson. Yeah, as I say, for me, it's just a model piece of work. So I won't say anything more than that. Move to recommendation. It's just really it's really just an update. So there's no certain action to take. But I think actually the overall message to come from this committee today on this report is this was an outstanding piece of work, and many congratulations to everybody involved in it. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, move on to agenda item 11, which is the committee's work programme. Obviously, with this committee, a lot of the items are sort of fairly standard items and sort of appear on a pretty much a cyclical basis. So it looks like it's a pretty full agenda for the 16th of March. We are proposing, though, there will be a couple of amendments to that. After speaking with Councillor Wood, the final item on the review, the effectiveness in terms of reference of the committee. Obviously, I'm sort of new chairman, and to Councillor Wood, we've got a busy agenda. We're thinking maybe of pushing this back towards the autumn, and trying to use Assurance Lincolnshire, who will be our new internal auditors, who will have then been in post for 6 months. Because I know that the team led by Lucy Pledge at Lincolnshire County Council, I've done some work with the audit committee at the County Council around effectiveness in terms of reference, and I just think that maybe that they could be of real use after observing a couple of audit committee meetings to sort of come back in the autumn on this, because we need to add to the agenda on the 16th of March the fact that the financial procedure rules and the contract procedure rules do need to come in March in order that they fit in with the constitution review. So in effect, we'll be bumping that item until the autumn and filling it in with the financial management and contract procedure rules. One of the views of the committee are on that. Thank you. So on that basis, there are a few items still to be allocated as and when required. So I think that maybe myself and Councillor Sue Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if we could perhaps consider putting the risk management framework into perhaps March, if we're dropping one of the other items, in that we've had a number of issues. Now, I know Richard and I have probably well, not a difference of opinion, but around, you know, an oversight of risk, let's say, and we've exchanged email as to where we think that it sits, and I think we've got one or two pretty major issues where I think from a governance point of view, I would like to be assured that the risk management around those issues was in place before they've worked through. Very happy out of the meeting to have a conversation with you. But, you know, in general, can we look at the risk management?
Thank you very much, Councillor Woolley. Richard, your views on that?
I mean, strategic risk races on the agenda for that meeting anyway, so we can expand that further into the risk framework. It's not due for a formal review, but we can provide an updated narrative. Just conscious though that if we're bringing contract procedure rules and financial regulations as well, that's going to make that quite a significant agenda for that meeting. To be honest, we need to liaise with external audit because there are 2 items on there that are down for external audit, and there are, if you know, national conversations about the audit regime for next year changing. So the timing of that might change again. So I think we know what's been asked, and we'll perhaps work between now and then just to hone in on the agenda, because there are still things on there that may or may not come forward in the way that's been portrayed today.
Thanks, Richard. Well, I think that's it. I think maybe then that myself and Councillor Wood should work with you when we get more clarity around this. I think actually adding the risk management framework to this regional registration makes sense, and we've got one report on risk, and I appreciate obviously it's going to be a big agenda, so maybe it would be a case of some work outside this committee, and then letting all members of the committee know what's being pushed back to a future meeting and the reasons why, so everybody's aware of the work programme. I think there seems to be a general consensus on that. Okay, thanks very much. Thank you. Okay, that's agenda item 12 now is any other business. I've got no items of any other business. Has anybody else? Any other items of business? Okay, that's great. So just on, well, a minute to 4 o'clock, I declare this meeting closed. Thank you very much, members and officers, for a very, I think,